Hello everyone. Today I'm going to bring you something what I think invites some pretty interesting discussion about fountain pens. I was inspired by last week's episode of The Pen Addict where they did a quick little discussion talking about a tier list of fountain pen filling systems, and they mentioned a few, but I thought that this subject could be addressed in a more thorough fashion and go through a majority of the popular fountain pen filling systems and rank them in a tier list and see the benefits and the downsides of each one. So that's what we're doing in today's video. Let's just get right into it. Okay, so here we are. A pretty good list. It's definitely not comprehensive, but I did what I could. So I guess let's get started. Let's get rolling into it. So first of all, we have the Japanese style eyedropper, which is basically an eyedropper with a valve where you can close it. The picture that should be on the screen is of this Opus 88, which uses this style, and it's pretty good. It's relatively easy to fill because at least with the Opus 88s, it comes with an eyedropper, and you don't need to worry about it leaking or anything like that because it's pretty secure with that whole screw-in stop gap. So I think it's a pretty good filling system. I think it's a solid B tier. It's a good one to start out with. It doesn't excel particularly at anything, maybe in capacity, but it's not terrible, not out of the park amazing either. Moving on, next we have eyedropper, traditional eyedropper. There's a lot you have to deal with: silicone grease, O-rings. I usually don't eyedropper like this much because it's a bit of a hassle, and it does leak sometimes. I've had eyedroppers leak on me no matter how hard I try. I think it's D tier. I think it has its uses, but I don't think it's redeeming for that. I use a eyedropper Platinum Preppy as a highlighter, and that's about it. Okay, now we have the lever filler, classic American vintage filler, and definitely the most common, I would say, vintage filling mechanism, at least on American pens. And everyone sort of seems to rag on the lever filler. It's really annoying, it doesn't have that much ink capacity. It's the material that the sac is made of in lever fillers can dry out. It's susceptible to some ink types. But it's also really easy to clean, tremendously easy to clean. And it fills really quickly. Just one pull of the lever and you've got as good of a fill as you're going to get. And I think for that reason it's not that bad. I think it's above eyedropper for sure. I think it's a solid C tier. It's something you can work with. People do enjoy the lever filler. If you're a fan, I understand. But if you're not, I understand that too. Now, before we talk about the modern vacuum filler, I want to talk about the vintage vacuum filler, because there's a difference. Vintage vacuum fillers don't really have a way to deal with you pulling the vacuum rod back while the pen is filled. And that's just to do with the fact that it's basically closed off at the end, and the filling rod just has a seal on the front, and so if it's filled up, the liquid after it fills really has nowhere to go but to squeeze through, so you can't really have that good of a seal, or your liquid's going to come out the back of the pen. So you kind of have to balance that. Normally it works okay, but in terms of cleaning, there's always a risk of liquid coming out the back. And for that reason, I think it's C tier. I don't think it's D tier because it does have some benefits. It's got great ink capacity. It's really cool. It was pretty ingenious, pretty inventive for the time, but there are downsides that aren't universal, they aren't common, and they aren't consistent, but they can crop up and they are kind of annoying, and you need to watch out for them. I just put the wrong one there. So the vintage vacuum goes there. But the modern vacuum fixes these issues. You'll see on like the Pilot Custom 823 and the TWSBI Vac 700, the piston sort of head at the end of the vacuum filler, it can move back when you're like pulling it, or it can move when you're pulling it back so that it allows ink through, so it doesn't create a pressure buildup in the back and then basically expel ink out the back of the pen. And for that reason, I think modern vacuums are definitely better. I don't think they're perfect, and the fill that you get isn't always super consistent either, but I definitely think they're a solid B tier. Now, the bulk filler. If you've used a bulk filler, everyone that has a conid, these are pretty much only on conids. There's also a sort of modified bulk filler on pen BBS pens, but the conid is what it's famous for, and it does work really well, I have to say. It's got a big ink capacity. It's super fun to use, inventive, really well made, and yeah, not much to complain about it. A little difficult to clean, I will say, the bulk filler, but in pretty much every other aspect, it's pretty great. So it's a solid A tier. Now for the pneumatic filler, this is the one on pens like the ASC Bologna and Wall Eversharp Deco Band, the modern version, as well as vintage fountain pens were pretty common, had some pretty well-known pneumatic fillers as well. And that's where you put your finger on the back to stop the ink from escaping out the back end and essentially create a pressure difference yourself. So instead of pressing down with a lever, you have the air compressing the sac, and then when you let go, the sac can fill up. And this basically is just a worse lever filler. Like, it accomplishes the same thing as a lever filler. It has all the same problems as a lever filler, but it's also slower. And just not quite as efficient. It's not something that will break down as easily over time, I guess you could say is an advantage, because the lever filler needs, to have that moving piece in the lever, whereas you can really just create like a sleeve that you can put and then a hole at the back of the pen. So maybe it's a little easier in that way, but other than that, it's really not as good as the lever. I think it's is it better than the eyedropper? I don't know. But I think it's definitely a D tier filling system. It has all of the annoyances of a lever filler, like cranked up to 11. Next, in terms of the Crescent Filler, it's pretty much the same thing. I would say it's also similar to a lever filler because it has a sac, but the problem is that it needs a huge bulky piece on your pen, whereas a lever filler is it's very streamlined and it doesn't really stick out. The Crescent Filler, you need a big bulky crescent to operate. And I include I didn't want to include a coin filler on this list because I could only include so many and I didn't want to look for every little example, but a coin filler is basically just a Crescent Filler, except you use a coin to press down the sac rather than a built-in metal crescent that can press it down. But the Crescent, it's not great, just because it has that bulky bit on the pen. I think it's better than Pneumatic and Eyedropper. I think it's high D tier, low C tier, but I'll put it on high D tier for now. Next, we have the Safety Filler. Honestly, I'm a fan of safety fillers. There are two different types, the sort of Boston style and continental style. Continental style is a little more difficult to manufacture and restore and upkeep and things like that, but they both serve their purpose quite well. They essentially just use the entire pen as a way to store ink, and then the nib comes out the top when you need to use it. They're a different way of using fountain pens, I would say, because you have to be conscious of always opening it up when it's upright. So it's not perfect. I definitely agree it's not perfect, but it is cool, and I think that gives it points. I'm not gonna lie. I like safety fillers. I think they're unique. I think there's something that could be expanded upon in today's fountain pen market, in the fountain pen hobby. And I think they have a lot more potential to be explored there. I think it's either low B tier for me or high C tier, because it does have a lot of ink capacity, similar to a modern vacuum. Maybe not quite as convenient, but also cooler. I think I would put it below a modern vacuum. So, Vacuumatic. I think Vacuumatics are super cool, mostly just on Parker Vacuumatic and Parker 51 Vacuumatic pens. It's just, it's a filling system with a little button at the back that you press. That's one I forgot. Button filler. I would basically put it the same as a lever filler, except it's more difficult to operate. But anyways, Vacuumatic. It's, I think, pretty good. It's difficult to restore compared to a lever filler, but it's not terrible, and it's fun to use. It is pretty hard to clean. It's easy to get a full fill, and that is a big advantage. And it does hold a lot of ink compared to how much space. It doesn't take up that much space in the barrel, but it's also pretty much a pain to clean. I think probably the most annoying to clean, maybe even more annoying than vintage vacuums. Vacuumatic filling systems just expel so little ink when you press the button at the back, and it takes forever. Just take my word for it. If you haven't, if you don't like cleaning pens, maybe the Vacuumatic's not for you. But I think I would put it below lever, maybe above a vintage vacuum, just because you don't have the problem of the ink coming out the back end. But I would say solid C tier. Now, in terms of the touchdown filler, it's pretty similar to the pneumatic, except it's just all internalized in the pen. There's not a hole that you put your finger on. There's a hole on the side of the barrel that gets covered up when you start to press down. I think it's better than the pneumatic. Not by much though. It's also a pain to clean. I think I would put it high C tier. And maybe this is just personal bias, but just because the pens that the touchdown is in, are all pretty good pens, whereas the pneumatic's a bit more hit or miss. I don't know. I might just be, totally spitballing here. But I think the touchdown is a little better than the pneumatic system. Yeah, it's a tough call. I don't know if it's high D or low C, but let me know what you think, if they are even different in your opinion. Now, Snorkel Filler. A Snorkel Filler is a touchdown filler, except you have a snorkel that comes out of the feed as you twist it to open up the filler that extends into the ink, so you don't have to get your nib sullied with ink. And it's cleaner, but it's also a very complicated filling system. There's a reason it's not really done much. But the cool factor is off the charts, I would say. It's one of the coolest filling systems, along with the bulk filler and the safety. Up there with my personal favorites, and I think honestly that just elevates it to like solid B tier, just because of how cool it is. I would put it above the safety. Should I put it? I think it's. It's honestly the coolest pen, like filling system. Even if it's kind of annoying. Just the ingenious of. How it works. It's just amazing. We got the two, I think probably most popular filling systems saved for last. Piston and Cartridge Converter fountain pens are pretty much everywhere. Cartridge Converter is the most popular by far. I think it's super easy to clean if you have, like a bulb syringe, and it's incredibly convenient. You can use cartridges, which I'm not a huge fan of, but they do have their purpose. And then the converter, it's really easy as a sort of communication tool to get people interested in fountain pens. It's very visually obvious what it does, and it's not as much stress. It's not as stressful, to operate if you're a newer fountain pen fan. It's very easy, and even though it lacks, elegance or intrigue, I think it still has a lot of value. I think for that reason, I would put it high A tier. I don't think I agree with what both Mike and Brad said in the Pen Addict podcast. There are really no S tier fountain pen filling systems. All of them have their flaws, and that's okay. There's no perfect fountain pen out there. But everyone has their own favorite, and I think that's awesome. And so finally moving into the piston filler, I think this is a difficult one because it is annoying to clean, better than some of the lower tier ones on this list, but it also, I mean, it has a large ink capacity. It is cool, especially, I mean, a lot of people, like, you know, you get so used to piston fillers as a fountain pen fan, but I mean, just objectively, they're super cool. And I think for that reason, I think it deserves to also be in the A tier. There's a reason why the Cartridge Converter and Piston Fillers... Oh my, sirens outside. There's a reason why the Cartridge Converter and Piston filling systems are so popular, and I think because they're both great filling systems. I know each of them has their detractors. Some people only use Cartridge Converters, some people only use pistons. But I think they're both great. I think the bulk filler's up here because it has a great ink capacity. It's super cool, but it's not really that common because it's difficult to manufacture. But the Cartridge Converter and the piston are iconic. They're super useful, and they have a bunch of fans in the fountain pen world for a reason. And so I think those are the A tier ones, definitely. Now, looking back at this list, is there anything I would change? We got a Snorkel, Japanese style eyedropper, modern vacuum and safety in B tier. I think I'll go for that. I think, I don't know about the specific order, but I feel good with these letters. You got your lever filler, your Vacuumatic, vintage vacuum and touchdown in C, and then you got your Crescent, Pneumatic, and Eyedropper in D tier. I think these are all great filling systems in their own right. No hate to any of these, you know. But yeah, I think these are my final decisions. I think this is a pretty good list. Let me know what you think, if there's any ones that I missed blatantly, and if I got anything totally wrong, and if I should change my opinion. But with that in mind, thank you very much for watching, and I hope you have a good one, and I'll see you very soon. Bye-bye.